Music can change the world. Music can affect your life. But to find the important stuff, you may have to dig a little deeper than American Idol. Welcome to The Deep Cut. This is a podcast that does that digging for you. We shovel through the surface noise that is known as Top 40 Radio and find the gems that are often overlooked. I'm your host, Mick Gray. Let's dig in. In the late 80s, when Ken Stringfellow and his childhood friend John Auer started playing in bands, little did they know that they would be thrown kicking and screaming into what would be known as the grunge scene. Being from Bellingham, Washington made the connection to grunge easy, but they really were anything but a grunge band. More rooted in bands like the Hollies, Big Star, and power pop of the 70s, they were more about harmony-driven vocals and chiming guitar riffs. For part one of our two-part Posies interview, we talk with Ken Stringfellow, who, after almost 30 years, is still a partner with John Auer in the Posies, but also has a fantastic solo career as a singer, songwriter, producer, multi-instrumentalist, and now, what we will hear more about, movie star. Today we're talking to Ken Stringfellow of the Posies and many, many different projects. He's an amazing musician, busy all the time, multi-instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, jet setter. You're all over the place, aren't you? You're constantly traveling.
It is true. I have try and make myself available and just be ready to go where things are happening, go where the work is, go where I don't build in very much recovery time between anything. So I am kind of sandwiching a lot of, and I have a lot of interests too. So those interests to serve them all and to pursue them all, I have to really pack my calendar Tetris style. And I'm willing, and so far, touch wood, able.
Yeah, it seems to you are efficient. It seems like.
Yeah, I think so. I think there is something about taking the time to do stuff right and not getting too impatient and frazzled and just rushing through stuff just to do it. However, I like to be on the ball and I definitely am not one to overthink or overcook. I think that is something that I think is a good quality that I have, because I know people who are the opposite, extreme opposite, and they overthink and overcook, and yes, they're less prolific, but you're thinking quantity over quality, but in fact the quality goes down because they don't trust themselves.
Yeah, I think that's true in most art in general. I mean, it's like the initial emotion and passion is where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that. Of course, there's ideas that you might want to refine a little bit, but not too much.
Yeah.
I think it really is about trusting. And I have to say that Alex Chilton, was a great teacher for this concept. When we made a Big Star album in 2004, which was released the next year, called In Space, the first time Big Star had made an album in 20 plus years, Alex, we recorded basically as a live band, and every day we set up, I played bass, John Auer and Alex played guitar, Jody Stevens, of course, on the drums, and we would just basically create a song every day. A couple of covers, a couple of classical pieces that Alex transcribed for Rock Band, and then then we also created music every day.
That's amazing.
And of course, we'd just get to the point where we were feeling kind of comfortable with the tune. Tape was rolling from the minute we started to mess around with it. And we'd get to the thing where we're like, okay, I got this. This is a good take. Now I know the song. And Alex would typically go back a couple takes before and say, no, this one's the one. And, it seemed like, Alex was just being contrary in a way at the time. And I was like, well, I think he's just choosing the early rough takes just out of principle. But no, actually they were better. And, he wouldn't allow me to fix anything on the bass, and I'd want to go and punch in on something and he'd be like, no, he'd be like, well, actually to be honest, he would say, why? And I would say, well, this is not quite blah, blah, blah. And he's like, and he'd be like, your point being, and the truth of the matter is that later on, those little quote unquote errors, or shall we say that things that were not in my control, weren't really noticeable, and they didn't affect the listening experience. And on the contrary, these takes had more energy. So I took that home, because of course, with the computer we can fix everything,
yes.
And fix, I put in quotes there, because you're basically altering a moment and technically damaging a moment, because you're moving electrons around that in a way that didn't really happen. It's a necessary evil from time to time, but used in extreme moderation, I think.
Yeah.
And it tends to be the go-to, where you just start fixing it, and maybe you can just leave it alone. And so, but those things when you're kind of getting into it, are really, where you have to be on your toes when you're first learning something, or when you're walking that tightrope where you're not totally 100% have it all worked out. And those are interesting moments, especially if you're a good musician. Your exploratory moments, if your chops are good, should be pretty usable.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it surprise somebody to find that too much sun can make you blind? Something so bright as you tends to burn me out. It's true, I'm out for good this time. So I guess I'll turn my back on the sun. Something about it just don't seem to be as fun.
You brought up Mr. Chilton there, and I don't know, most people know who Alex Chilton is. He's a started out as a kid, 16 years old, in a band called the Box Tops, and made a ton of money, or the band made, I should say, they sold a lot of records.
They made somebody a ton of money.
Yeah, somebody a ton of money. And then he goes off on his own solo and starts this band Big Star, which ends up being, you would probably agree with me, probably the most influential band on indie rock, what becomes indie rock.
They're kind of the text of indie rock in many ways. Yes.
And so you guys, and John of the Posies, got lucky and blessed to be able to actually, later on, when the Big Star was way gone, you guys reformed, and you were the band behind Alex.
Yeah, with Jody, the drummer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's...
What an opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing, really, because, of course, there's a lot of very able-bodied Big Star fans out there, and a lot of very enthusiastic and vocal and talented and popular Big Star fans. And yet, at the end of the day, Jody felt comfortable with us just from the little that he knew of us and our music at that point. I mean, we'd known each other for a couple of years because we were such big fans. We tracked Jody down, and gave him our music, etc. And he got to know us, and he really liked what we were doing. But there's a lot of people that could have done a great job being a part of the reformed Big Star. There's also a lot of people who could have done a really good job as part of the reformed Big Star who didn't want to do it because they felt the music was so sacred that they didn't want to be part of it, thinking that if it didn't go well, that would be a stain on Big Star's legacy and theirs. But we were just way too into it, and we were confident. We knew we could do a great job.
And also, that's going back to that overthinking part of it again. If you have an opportunity to do something like that, just especially with a guy that is throw it at the wall and see what sticks kind of a guy like Chilton was, hey, you took it and you grabbed it by the horns.
At least, yeah. I mean, I think that was a sign that we were, that our naivete was working in our favor. we were too young to overthink it because we were just so enthusiastic, like really enthusiastic.
Yeah.
But like when people ask me if I can do something, if I'm up for some kind of musical task, I almost always say yes. There's a couple things that I don't do, one of which is mastering. People sometimes ask me for that, and I'm like, no, that's for the real scientists. But that's really about it. I really will throw myself into any kind of musical challenge, and usually, you figure it out on the fly,
Yeah.
Standing in the back of a car, music so loud, can't tell a thing, thinking about what to say. Can't find the line, no, I love you a lot, just don't know, should I not, waiting for a brighter day.
Seeing that we're on Alex Chilton, and I a lot of the time in these interviews, I first start trying to keep it all in chronological order, and then I go, no, let's just talk. But seeing we're talking about Alex, let's go fast forward. Alex died, was it about 5-6 years ago?
It was in March 2010.
Yeah, and then a few years later, Jody and a bunch of great musicians decided to do tribute shows.
Tribute show sounds kind of hokey.
Yeah,
I think that the Big Star Third project is a lot loftier and doesn't really deserve the mantle of being called a tribute show.
Yeah, I agree.
And actually, truth be told, those shows started in 2010, so it wasn't a few years later. Actually, it was later the same year that Chris and Jody and Mike Mills and Mitch Easter, et cetera, did the first one of those at the Cat's Cradle in Carrboro, North Carolina. But I think that in an odd way, the fact that Alex passed away, number one, made the urgency of presenting that music and preserving it and giving it kind of its museum quality framing became more urgent. And at the same time, I think Alex would never have wanted something like that museum quality, framing of his music to happen. I think he really was uncomfortable with the idea of people being too reverential about music.
Yeah.
Because I think for Alex, music is something was for everybody, that your only obligation to it was to pursue it in whatever way you felt comfortable with. He had a technical gift on the guitar, that he developed, over the years, but there are many projects where he chose to be surrounded by people and to perform as primitively as possible.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being a deft musician. It's about being, just doing whatever you feel like doing. So, but I think like getting too reverential was something Alex thought would find very corny. So in a way, like this project only was needed to exist because Alex was gone, and could only exist because Alex was gone.
Yeah.
And off we went. So, what we have been doing, and this has been, is really from the efforts of Chris Stamey, who played with Alex in the 70s when Chris moved to New York. Chris, whose record label in the 70s released Chris Bell's single "I Am the Cosmos."
Yeah.
And then Chris gained renown as a member of the band the DBs, and then as a solo artist and producer, etc. From there, and he's got a composition degree, so his arrangement skills are very good. And the Big Star Third album, for anyone out there who doesn't know it, Big Star made 3 albums in their brief career in the early 70s, which coming out as releases really had a lot of stumbles and hurdles and, bad business deals, etc. So the albums didn't get widely heard in their day. And the first two albums are very much, guitar, pop rock, wonderful albums, and then the third album is much more complex and involves, because the band was just Jody and Alex at that point, they augmented with a lot of different sounds like woodwinds, strings, found sounds and musique concrète, and this kind of thing is all playing in there. And so it's a very interesting album to try and play note for note because there are so many elements, and Chris really did a wonderful job working with Carl Marsh, who did all those string arrangements for this and woodwinds and things like that for the Big Star's third album, who is alive and well and living in Nashville.
Oh, wow.
And he kind of got out, he found his old notes and arrangements and went through that with Chris, and they, so you had someone who was, part of the album kind of helping.
Wow, I didn't know that.
With the restoration of it.
That's really interesting, yeah. Now that like we say, this Big Star Third, you guys have been touring across the country, and now there's going to be a live DVD coming out of that?
Yeah, we've performed, I wouldn't say touring, but we've performed the show around the world.
Yeah.
We did it at Sydney Festival in Australia, done it at the Barbican in London, Primavera Sound in Spain. We've done it in Seattle, San Francisco, LA, New York, Chicago, and so on and so on. And we did a show in Los Angeles this spring and filmed it, fully professionally and recorded it, etc. And that's going to be, yes, however movies are seen, DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, who knows, maybe even theatrical, television, whatever. And so we did so the concept is, we perform Big Star's third album, this complex, wonderfully kind of heavily emotional, intense album. We perform it note to note, with Jody, the original drummer, and the only member of the band still alive, playing drums, with the aforementioned Chris Stamey, with Mike Mills from R.E.M., with Mitch Easter, the record producer, etc., playing on guitar. A bunch of great musicians that Chris Stamey knows from North Carolina, playing different instruments and singing, and myself. And John Auer is involved, and so we have different people singing different songs, like John, like Ira Kaplan from Yellow Tango, Robin Hitchcock, Jeff Tweedy, and Pat Sansone from Wilco. Who else is on this show?
It's a smorgasbord,
but
boy.
And then we have the string section, is being played by none other than the Kronos Quartet, the preeminent experimental string ensemble in the world. Ralph Carney, who was Tom Waits' sax player, is our sax player. Our keyboard player. There's Charles Kleber, who's one of Chris's, young musicians from North Carolina, who's the main keyboard player, but also Ben Montench joins us for the film. It's quite full on, and this speaks about, it's not just like we grab people at random. These people are people who love the music of Big Star and want to help it stay alive and present it to an even wider audience. Seeing that the music didn't really have a wide audience in its day.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I got to see the San Francisco Fillmore show the last time they came through. Unfortunately, you and John were not in the lineup at that time, so I'm looking forward to the DVD. But like you say, the Kronos Quartet. I mean, I had always known of them. I have their records, but I had never seen them live. And to have them involved in that is just sends chills up your spine. The whole show sends chills up your spine if you're an Alex Chilton fan. Unbelievable. I seriously can't wait for the DVD.
Yeah, well, so that's the idea, is that we are, in the post-production stage right now, and the goal is to get this thing released in the fall. And I don't know exactly what is going to be first, if they're going to wait and try and have it be broadcast, or if they're just going to issue the consumer media first or what. But look for it. It's from what I can see and what I have seen and what I witnessed at the performance, it's going to be an incredible performance captured, in high resolution. And it should be great. Fingers crossed.
I can't wait.
Take care not to hurt yourself. Beware the need for help. You might need too much, and people are such. Take care, please take care. Some people read idea books, and some people have pretty looks. But if your eyes are wide and all words aside, take care, please take care.
Well, let's go way back. We got to talk about you and John Hour's band, the Posies. You guys started about 1987 or 88 or something like that?
Yeah, well, we started in 1987, so it'll be 30 years next year.
Wow, congratulations.
And, John and I actually go further back than that, that we had bands in high school. And even the first band that I had with John Hour, he was still in middle school.
Wow.
Because we're a year apart. So when I was a freshman in high school, he joined our little band that was kind of the first band that I ever had with my junior high school or middle school friend, Chip Westerfield. And so, I've known John since he was 13, basically.
That's amazing.
And so I had to be 14, and I'm 47 right now. So, 33 years ago.
And this is in Bellingham, Washington, right?
Yep.
Beautiful part of the country. I happened to be up there a few months ago at a comic book convention. It was wonderful.
That was in Seattle or?
In Bellingham.
No kidding.
They have
That's weird. Why did they have it?
Because comic books are so cool that even in Bellingham, people like them.
Well, I mean, of course. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that probably like one of the, the biggest indie in the world, comic book wise, is in Seattle.
I know.
It seems like a logical choice to be in Seattle, but hey, Bellingham
I think
has
there's
more parking.
Yeah. It was a tiny little convention, but we had a blast there. But anyways, you guys started around that time, and now I saw something, and I don't know how early this was, but you guys were playing gigs with the Replacements in those days.
Well, not when we first started.
No. But later you did.
But the thing is, again, for those of you who don't know. So in 1987, I was in my first year at the University of Washington and had moved to Seattle, and John was a senior in high school in Bellingham, and we had been in bands together on and off, and different. I had different bands and projects and things I was into, but we spent a lot of time. And we're really inseparable in high school, working on a lot of things. And John, at that time, had put together an incredible home studio with his dad. Back in the day, now everybody has a quote unquote home studio. Everybody has GarageBand and a USB mic. But this was, pretty special as an analog studio.
That could be quite expensive back then. Yeah.
Well. Not so much, I think. I mean, yes and no. I mean, a lot of, the gear from the 60s that they had in there, like, an LA2A limiter and, the stuff that maybe, if you're not a recording person, this won't mean much to you, but this stuff that are very coveted pieces of vintage gear now weren't cool. Everybody was upgrading to the latest thing in the 80s, and
Tech-
more
tech-
more compact kind of gear, and
Yeah.
the 60s stuff was seen as cumbersome and clunky, and so I think they picked up a lot of old gear for nothing.
Yeah, so like a lot of high tech was starting to happen. All this new equipment was coming out, and the old stuff was like, oh, get rid of the old stuff.
Exactly. So they that was pretty neat. And then they had an 8-track, nothing to do with the 8 tracks that we know from the 70s
Right.
home media, but a 8-channel analog tape machine, which is fairly compact. Like looking like a home reel-to-reel tape recorder that you might have seen in your grandparents' house or something like that. But anyway, so we had this at our disposal, and we were there all the time. So in 1987, I'd moved off to Seattle to go to the university. And I started writing some tunes and sent those to John, and we found we had some really similar, even though we hadn't, since I moved away, we kind of lost touch a little bit. And we found out that we were kind of really working in the same direction separately, and said, hey, these songs are quite different than anything we worked on before. Let's see what we can make out of this. And so in 1987, between my first and only 2 years of college, I was living back in Bellingham for the summer, and we got together and we recorded one of these songs at his studio, and it went really well. And we played a little show at the FOE Hall in Bellingham, and played a bunch of covers and our 2 original songs that we had worked up at that point, and felt, hey, this is something really cool. So then we, over the holiday break, at the end of 1987, where I'm, a sophomore at the University of Washington in Seattle, and John is a freshman at Western Washington University in Bellingham, I came up for the Christmas break, and we sat down to really record the songs we had at that point, 12 songs in total. And we did that at John's studio. And then there's another studio associated with the university there that has the same tape format. So we did drums there and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we, being completely, and here's again, overthinking, and, we just were so naive and clueless that in 1988, in the spring, when we finished the recordings, we made cassettes that we had we had covers printed and labels printed. And we took these cassettes around to local record stores in Seattle and Bellingham, and local radio stations in Seattle and Bellingham. The cassettes were left on consignment at the stores, and they were, dropped off at the front desk at different radio stations. And we had this incredible thing happen where a commercial radio station where we dropped this tape off put us into rotation.
Wow.
Here we are, only been a couple of years, maybe longer. Yes, it's true. I'm no good at being a strong man. You're stronger, but I think maybe you should take a good look at my feelings. Can't you see? I'm another one just like you, a human being. I don't wanna have to sacrifice to get along. I don't ever wanna be the one to say I'm wrong. I may hate you sometimes, but I'll always love you.
And as you can imagine, things snowballed incredibly quickly from there. This is when we didn't even have like a 4-piece band. We'd played 3 acoustic shows, including the one I mentioned. So 2 in 1987 and 1 in 1988. And all of a sudden, we're all over the radio. And so then reviews started to happen and all these things. And it happened so fast and so thoroughly that many people in the music scene in Seattle were 100% sure that this was some kind of, there was some kind of Svengali, who was pushing this as if it was a completely naive project, but it was too successful to be believable from considering the resources that we had, and for us too. But it really happened that way, and we found a rhythm section quickly. Rick Roberts and Mike Musburger, 2 guys who lived just up the street from where I was living in Seattle, and had a house with a basement and a rehearsal place, and we said, okay, this is, and we put out this cassette in April, and the radio play started to happen. And by May, we were playing shows. And it went from, playing at a club to already some people. And by the summer, we played a show that one of the big radio, because once one radio station is on it, then they're all on it. And a huge, very commercial radio station, we did a show on the beach in Edmonds, Washington to like 1,500 people.
Whoa.
And this is like, so things were kind of going crazy. I mean, we couldn't get a paying audience that big, but there was enough awareness to draw, like a free show. We would get a couple thousand people pretty soon. And in Bellingham too, we played, they do outdoor shows at Western Washington University on their campus square. And, like 2,000 people showed up when we played in the square. And I've seen 40 people show up to those kind of things. So things were really exploding. So yes, then by the end of 1988, that cassette had been picked up by the local label Pop Llama Records, which was our hope and dream all along, because we loved the music coming out on Pop Llama. And people always say, weren't you guys on Sub Pop, or ask about Sub Pop, or ask why we weren't on Sub Pop. And to be honest, Sub Pop was only just getting started. They'd put out a compilation in 1987. But they were just releasing their first albums, late 88 and into 89 and stuff. So they hadn't really become much. Yeah. And Pop Llama was much more established and had some good success. And we liked the music coming out. And some of the bands that later moved to Sub Pop, like the Fastbacks and the Walkabouts, at that time were releasing on Pop Llama. So Pop Llama put out our album, and then, that local radio phenomenon that we had actually, especially on the West Coast, continued. So Live 105 put us in San Francisco, put us into rotation on this indie record, which it's a pretty big deal. Yeah, the record made its way to a commercial station in Minneapolis, where Paul Westerberg's wife was at the time was a DJ, and so she loved the record. Started, she put it into rotation on her station, and Paul heard the record and he loved it. And so when the replacements were coming through. And by the way, one of Paul's best buddies is Scott McCoy from the band The Young Fresh Fellows. Oh, yes. Release on Pop Llama, and Scott, who was kind of our hero, local music hero, and who gave us our first review and our first gig. Through that whole familial relation, when the replacements came to town in 89, they asked us to support them, and we did that in Vancouver and Seattle. And then, a couple years later so then we got a big record deal, and we put out a major label album, and then we went on tour. And then in 1991, we went on a proper tour with the replacements, where we played at the Warfield, for example, in San Francisco.
Wow. And so that's the first record you were talking about is Failure, which came out in 88. And now you're around 1990. This is Dear 23 you're talking about now, right?
Yeah. So we were signed to the Geffen Records.
Big time.
Very big time. And they were starting a new imprint for, alternative music, quote unquote, called DGC. And that was all administered by one A&R guy, Gary Gersh. And so he had signed Sonic Youth, the Sundays, and John Doe from the band X, and said, hey, would you want to be a part of this? And absolutely. We'd already had, with the radio success that we had, every major label calling. And, a lot of the stuff, God bless this one guy, from Polygram, who came and saw us play like at a frat party, and even ended up playing cowbell with us. And we're having dinner, with him, and he's like, well, guys, it's great. I think you'd be great at, as part of the Polygram family. And I was talking to John, and he said, I said, what do you think about the band? He said, yeah, I think that, they've got potential. And we're like, John who? And he looked at us, he goes, Bon Jovi, kind of thing, like that would entice us, we're like, well, we don't really want to, that's not really the direction we're going, as much as, I don't want to put anybody down, but,
exactly.
But he's in a different category. Yeah. Anyway, but, Geffen, not only were they already the home of like one of our all-time favorite bands, XTC, this imprint was really something cool. And of course, because Sonic Youth was on the label and us, a band from Seattle, who, you know, we're in a very different musical world, but very respected. It's by these two things that Nirvana ended up on DGC, and we all know what happened.
Yeah. Well, you guys, speaking of in another world, you guys really were musically in another world than what was happening in music in those days. I mean, everything that was coming out of your area of the country, you were not a grunge band.
True.
But you were there at the same time, and you were, quote unquote, competing with this sound. And I don't know, it might have been the best thing in the world for you, maybe. I don't know, but you guys had a unique sound that stood out from all the other stuff.
Please forgive, for they know not what they've done, and if they did, they'd surely resurrect their trust. Promises were made to break, and the family kept its end, and now your answer, my friend, is blowing in one head and out the other. But you will find yourself, you will recognize and realize, even when you can't forget the times they tried you, things denied you, inside the big nameless house from which everyone moves away. Everyone moves away. Growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, it's definitely good that we were in Seattle, and Seattle in 1990, et cetera, was pretty much the biggest thing since, Swinging London in terms of music.
Yeah.
Just to put it in kind of a perspective, something like 100 million albums in sales from one city of 500,000 people, like a city, less than a quarter of the size of London in 5 years. Just think about that. More albums than the Beatles sold came out of Seattle in 5 years. And that's pretty incredible, all told. And of course, like, being around that kind of explosion is great. And we came from Bellingham. We were younger. We had very different sensibilities and we were a lot more naive. The bands that we all know and love from Seattle were, like between, 3 to 5 years older than us, the guys, and were able to go to bars, and they had that, that scene of, like, because the Seattle music scene, Seattle being very restrictive in terms of its alcohol laws, the music happened in bars. And that was just a world I couldn't access until the end of 1989, when we'd already been playing for a year.
Yeah.
We could play in bars with a lot of paperwork, but we couldn't hang out in one.
Jeez. That's a little bit of a problem.
Well, no, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, all in good time. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, yes, we were very different. We had very different sensibilities, and we also had never toured, and all these things, kind of, where we were in 1990 is completely different from where we were in 1991. And the difference would be that we'd done a lot of touring around the country, around the continent, in Canada as well, in 1 year's time. And that changed, and for those who noticed that the guitars are in a lot different place, and the album is a lot less 60s when we released our third album, Frosty on the Beater, in 1993, and people said, "Oh, well, you were reacting to the grunge scene, blah blah." Not really. I mean, what we've done is gone on tour and discovered how we liked to play, and we made a record that's much more lively and live in 1992 than we did in 1990 when we'd never toured, and so our first two albums are very much studio creations and a little bit precious because of it.
Yeah, and then the live, the feeling of what you did live, you went, ooh, maybe we can use some of this stuff, some of this in studio,
Well, it just, we just played differently together.
Yeah, changes everything.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I was able to plug into a Fender Twin Reverb and just to feel, it was like, instead of playing in your little garage on a little funky amp, how it comes down to the most simple thing of, oh, you mean I don't have to hit the strings as hard? So, I mean, this is the simplest thing in the world. All of a sudden, that changes everything about the way you play. So playing live and all of a sudden learning all sorts of different things would change everything too.
Yeah, and just having an audience and then having their feedback, is a thing too.
So, chart success was happening. Golden Blunders off of Dear 23 was a top 10 college hit. And then in 1993 with Frosting on the Beater, you had Dream All Day, number 4 modern rock hit, and 17 mainstream charts. So you guys are starting to hop at this point.
Yes. Things went really with, the touring for Dear 23 in 1991 was pretty much a slog of playing to nobody with a few exceptions. And then, of course, the Replacements tour, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
But, we really developed our own audience, and with, we had radio stuff, and we were, touring a lot and playing very well. We'd become a really good live band, if I may say so.
Yes.
And we started to tour internationally. We had an incredible amount of success in France just from reviews before we even got there on tour. And then, we also at this time, we started playing, as part of Big Star. And so this, I think, gave us, a new level of awareness amongst people and music fans and musicians in general. And so, it all kind of, that all had a bunch of synergy to it. And we toured a lot and did great. And we had, we could pack clubs all over the country. And then we went on tour in Europe with Teenage Fan Club. And that was like the perfect introduction for us to the European audience. It was a perfect band. If you already like Teenage Fan Club, pretty good chance you're going to like us.
That's
kind of thing.
That's a perfect combo. God, I wish I would have seen that tour.
Yeah, it was awesome. And so then we, just from that tour alone, from that point on, we could pack venues in Europe too. This plus the radio success, plus press, plus good reviews, plus everything. And, so we had this run from 93 to the end of the 90s that was, pretty full on. And in Seattle, by this time, we were selling out theaters. So we were, doing extremely well. Of course, we never quite graduated, if you're just looking at us on our own, as a band, like without comparing us to anybody, you're like, holy shit, this is amazing. Sorry for my French.
That's okay.
But of course, if you're comparing us to, the Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, even Candlebox, these bands are selling, all of whom have sold more than 10 million. And we're talking Pearl Jam, Nirvana, we're talking bands that have sold like almost 100 million records just on their own.
Yeah.
Of course, it's, it pales by comparison. But, we're on our own path, and we've always been on our own path. And I don't think that our music or even our career really pales by comparison. It's just a different thing. And it's just was never meant to be that wide. And we made music that was kind of purposefully quirky in a sense too. So we kind of damned ourselves to a more obscure path. But, like there's that whole Neil Young, like I've been in the middle of the road and I headed for the ditch on purpose. We didn't head for the ditch on purpose. But we have never been in the middle of the road. We've always made an effort to make our music, have a twist. And, at a certain point, if you're reaching into the middle ground of an audience, they want meat and potatoes. They do not want any twists.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or Nirvana are twist free, but they could kind of, heavy metal people or whatever, could kind of relate to the bands just because of their power, and they might just ignore some of the twists and just listen to the heaviness of it and kind of focus in on that. But we didn't have that, so we weren't interesting to that audience. But whatever.
Yeah.
We
the formula,
have a great audience.
Yeah, I mean the formula thing when you're on a gigantic label and there's pressure to put out records to make lots of money and sell lots of records, I would imagine that the people above you are saying, make more records like the one that sold 3 million. Don't change. Don't get quirky. Don't do anything. I could imagine.
Well, we never sold 3 million records though. So we were always quirky.
Yeah.
But, but Geffen was, was like, more like Asylum Records, like it was incredibly artist friendly. And so, Gary Gersh and when he left, his successor, Mark Cates, we're not the kind to put those kind of pressures. They wanted us to make great records. It's kind of the ideal situation. I mean, Geffen, Beck, Weezer, and then on the other side, Aerosmith, whatever, they were making fucking, moon crater filling amounts of money. So they weren't really under pressure. Of course, they weren't going to necessarily, lose money on us forever, but they were really into developing. And, we sold, 500,000 records all told.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a really good place for you to be at that moment. It worked out good.
Definitely.
I've got a lot of thoughts. I've got a lot of plans. I lost a lot of sleep trying to understand. I could dream all day. I could dream all day. I could dream all day.
Now, 1996's Amazing Disgrace, what label was that on?
That was on Geffen.
That's on Geffen.
1996.
That's also Geffen. And that's a really, really neat record. And was that the last Geffen record?
Yes.
Yeah. And
So then we had, kind of from there, things kind of went, like we kind of were at a crossroads after that record where we still hadn't graduated up to selling, in the millions. Though things were going really well. We had we were packing out venues, playing the main stage of European festivals, it was definitely working. But I think my partner in the band, John, my feeling is, and he's not here to debate this, but my feeling is that he just had some issues with things like depression, et cetera, in general. And I think he was going to see the negative side of everything first. And so he started kind of just becoming, he just kind of was kind of losing it, I guess, in a way, to be honest. And, had some, went through divorce, and, he was, smoking a lot of pot, and that's not probably a good thing to do if you're already kind of heading to depression, et cetera. And he just didn't kind of want to do anything. And, he didn't like touring because I think he was very, John was the kind of guy who at this time, he's different now, but at that time he was the kind of guy that, we'd be wherever, in Australia or Amsterdam or whatever, and he would just sit in his hotel room all the time. And of course he thought tour was boring and depressing.
So he was not at a good place in his life at that time, and that affected him, affected the music.
So he really wanted to, he thought we should be off the label. He kind of basically just tried to, sort of derail things in a way, and then quit. Thinking because the band was like probably the biggest part of our lives, that that must be the source of his problems or something,
Yeah.
like it was all very abstract and hard to follow. And ultimately, I think he realized that he made a mistake. But it was kind of impossible for us to carry on.
When I told you what you wanted to know, you said take me to Ontario. And when I showed you what you wanted to see, you said the flower that you planted in me had gone dry. Yeah, big birds flying overhead, who gives a shit? Big birds flying overhead, who gives a shit?
So
And
1998, you guys broke up and went your separate ways.
Yes.
And you did some interesting stuff around, well, it was a few years before also, but you got involved with the great musician who we just lost recently, Scott Miller of Game Theory and the Loud Family, and you co-wrote and recorded with him.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us a little about getting involved with him.
Well, I was just a huge fan of Game Theory. I saw them play a couple times when they came to Seattle, and, in the early days of the Posies, we were big fans of the Lolita Nation album, etc. And, it's now like some of the 90s things, there's so much going on. It's a little bit of a blur, but
I can imagine.
I remember it, in 1993, around the time that we were doing that first Big Star show, which was right at the same weekend that we released Frosting on the Beater in April of 1993, I feel like somebody gave me an advanced cassette. It said, if you're a, Game Theory fan, Scott has this new band, the Loud Family, and gave me an advanced cassette of their first album. But then I don't really remember how I actually managed to meet Scott. I really don't remember, sadly enough. But
it happened.
It looks like the first thing we did together was like in 1994. So, and that was really before I'd really done much other things. And I'm wondering, did we do something together when I was there with Big Star in 94? So we played there in 94, but I don't remember. But anyway, I worked on a couple different albums, and Scott was, really a very supportive and vocal fan, came to like every project and every show that I did in the Bay Area, pretty much. And, covered one of my songs live and wrote an essay about it.
Wow. He was a super fan, wasn't he? I remember seeing him at a lot of shows. I never knew him, but I remember seeing him going, wow, there's Scott Miller at the show.
Yeah. So, yeah.
There are ways. There are ways. If they'd ask, I'd have told the world to treat you at each stage. You could take what they throw at you. I don't want to believe that this time they really beat you. See you there, looking not meant to make it through. But don't you find it's on your mind? Your friends all going places, and even though they told you so, is that sufficient basis? And when you lose across the board, is trying still its own reward? Still its
And now that leads us to
Let's go forward. Yeah, let's go forward now to this year, tell us what you're working on in reference to game theory.
Well, something like 2009 or something like that. Scott had become a lot less prolific over the years, and was, he had a serious job, because, he had in the tech world, he had that expertise as well. And he kind of, focused on that and was raising a family and all that. So he hadn't really, he hadn't toured much and hadn't put out too many records, but in the latter part of the last decade, he reached out to me about, maybe it was around 2010. I don't know. I have to look up the email, but he reached out to me about working on a record. And he had this idea that the record would have quote unquote spheres of influence, and would be a much more collaborative kind of thing, than he'd done in the past. And later, I learned, from his wife, Christine, that this was going to be called a game theory album for the first time in 20 years or something like that. And, game theory, the band in its original, era, had many different lineups. Every album pretty much had a different lineup of people, and it was Scott composing a little universe of people he wanted to work with. And they would often change. So there's some precedent for that. Anyway, the truth of the matter is that Scott died unexpectedly in 2013, and had done some tentative steps to start this album and done a few little recordings here and there, and had a lot of partial demos and things and laying around. And so his widow, Christine, and myself have been picking through those pieces, and she wanted to see that album that he was starting to work on get finished. And there were some people that he'd put on his short list of people he was going to collaborate with, like Amy Mann, myself, John Auer, et cetera, and people that he'd been, known to want to work with and had worked with, from Will from Ockerville River and Nina Gordon from Veruca Salt and blah blah blah. And so we kind of are putting all these people together to finish this very, very fragmentary album that he left behind and make it a real album. And it's been slow going, but it's incredible what's come out of it, and we're getting there. And so we've done like a Kickstarter, which was very successful. And I'm just the hardest part is just nailing people down and their schedules and getting them to actually finish the thing that they have committed to, and that's happening.
Yeah.
And then when we get all this music assembled, we're gonna Mitch Easter is gonna mix it.
Oh man.
And since he did all of Game Theory and the Loud Family's albums.
Yeah. It's a real labor of love overall. I mean, this sounds like it's going to be a fantastic project. It's
pretty. He left a lot of things behind that are tantalizing, and we are stringing the tantalizing aspects together to make them mind blowing.
Gosh, so is it still potentially on schedule to be released next year?
Oh yes, definitely next year. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it seems like, and it's not the most wonderful thing to talk about, but it seems like in your life you have lost quite a few important people to you. I don't know how recently this has happened, but a couple of your band members, Darius Minwalla and Joe Skyward, both passed within the last 2 years?
Oh, not even. Like Darius, the drummer of the Posies, since unexpectedly, out of the blue, cause unknown, last May, so a year and change ago. And then our bass player on our 1990s albums, Amazing Disgrace and Success, Joe Skyward, died, from cancer. this year, and we'd known that was a likely outcome at a certain point, even though we also hoped that he would have a successful fight against it. But ultimately he fought it for 2 years and just didn't get any further. And he told us, when he first got the diagnosis, he said, well, I'm either going to live for 2 years or 10 with what I have and where it's at. And unfortunately it turned out to be 2.
It's tough stuff to handle. I mean, it has to affect your complete outlook on life. I know it does me when things like this happen.
Sure. Well, we had time to prepare with Joe, even though, yes, the end really accelerated and happened a lot sooner than I was expecting, even knowing what was going on. But with Darius, that just, he was 38 years old and very young and youthful and vital and seemingly healthy and blah, blah, blah. So, that he just really just dropped dead in his living room, not an OD and not, a suicide or something like that. That just completely broke us into pieces. And we were working on the new Posies album at that time. But that album having a very electronic basis, Darius had not been a part of the sessions. And we weren't really sure even what we were going to do as far as drums, but, then Darius was gone, and that really, it was hard to recover from. It's hard to find the motivation to pick up and go on, just losing a friend that close, and then, the idea of playing music just seemed completely trivial at that point.
Yeah.
But eventually it was kind of the thing that got us, gave us a reason to move forward and have a life,
Yeah.
It couldn't just be about death all the time. It's just not a good place. But it was definitely took a while to where like that thought of Darius and the loss was not overwhelming,
Yeah. That's tough stuff to deal with, but it's part of life. This is all part of life and these people would want you to use all the emotions of life, everything that happens, to use that to propel your art. That's the way the world works. That's the way I think anyways. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk a little bit about the new record, Solid States, and which is fantastic. Just came out, within the last year, and you're touring it on these. You toured it really amazingly on little tiny shows all around the country, small venues. We saw you at a little coffee shop a few months ago in Oakland. That was fantastic. Mm-hmm. So, how's the response on the record? Seems to be fantastic. I love it.
Yes, thank you. I think we've gotten some great reviews, and generally people are loving the album. And who the way albums release and sell and all that is really different nowadays. It's the yardstick for an album's success is much different,
completely different,
and a little more obscure. Things can look really good, and then there's not much that comes from it or whatever. But thinking positively, I feel like we've achieved everything we wanted to do and then some. And I think that the tour was an amazing experience, and the most enjoyable tour for all of us. And, I said these things about John and his headspace, 20 years ago. And I have to say that, I should say on the other side, he's, in a great place these days. And he has, he's happily married. He lives in France, and loves being on tour and plays great. Like the whatever he was going through 20 years ago is no longer in effect. So,
he seems to be doing fantastic. I'm hopefully going to talk to him, also, and this will be part 1 of a 2-part Posies, interview.
Double shot.
I wanna let you in a little secret I learned. People ain't no good. Although it's 'cause I'm afraid what comes if I'm understood. In this dystopia of the free, a little channel for you and me. And when the night surrounds you like an empty code offered by someone else, doors open for you and you're pleased to enter them by yourself. It doesn't faze you at all, 'cause you're a marketing goal.
Yeah, we have to mention Frankie Saragosa, your drummer that you have with you now. Fantastic addition to the band.
Yeah, and considering what had happened, not only is Frankie Saragosa an amazing musician, just I think a world-class drummer, and a fantastic engineer, mixer, producer, etc. I have worked in his studio on several different projects, and worked with him as a drummer on several different projects, and etc. So that's kind of Frankie mixed and played on my last solo album, Dancing in the Moonlight. So we go back.
Oh, I didn't know he was
some 5 years.
That. Yeah, I didn't know he was on that.
He is the guy that mixed it. They had this musical production team called The Lab. So that's the name that you see, but that's the name of his studio.
Ah.
So Frankie brings this incredibly rich musical ability to bear, and sensibility, and it also happens that he's psychologically, spiritually, really a great energy to have along. He's so enthusiastic, and so he wants things to work and is willing to work to make them work, and that's very important. So we did this tour and have been the album, really, in a way, and as a 3-piece, we've been touring with a laptop, running Ableton Live, and the bass parts are programmed into that laptop, and we run that through a bass amp. And there's something very magical about us as a 3-piece. It just is like perfectly balanced, kind of thing.
It is
being
good.
The way that our band works with 2 lead singers is really, it's already twice as much information as most people want. Most people want a focal point, and we have 2 focal points, and then those focal points are kind of, focused into in a 2-way exchange of energy into this one focal point, Frankie. So it kind of does. It's something that's an even number doesn't have a balancing point, because there's not a center to an even number, shall we say? But an odd number has a center, and 3 is the magic number.
It is so good. It's so good. You guys are coming back around to the West Coast, aren't you?
Yeah. We've announced a show in Denver that's already on sale at the Oriental Theater on November 20th. We've announced a Seattle show that goes on sale Friday at the Neptune Theater for November 16th. And we will be revealing, those are like shows in venues, which is different than what we did in the last tour, where it's all pop-up shows in non-venues.
Right.
And the rest of the shows we're going to announce for the West Coast and the Midwest for the rest of this year are going to be more pop-up shows.
Oh, fun.
There is a Bay Area date that is we're assembling right now. We're going to announce it soon.
Can't wait to hear about it. Before you go, I need you to at least talk a little bit about Ken the movie. What is this about?
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There's a director from Berlin, Claudia Ravarius, who the one feature-length film that she's made so far I really enjoy. It's called Chi l'ha visto. And she's been, we've been talking about doing a project together for a really long time. And she has made a concept. I mean, if you watch this film, Chi l'ha visto, the film she's proposing kind of runs along a similar vein, in which there's a main character, which the film is really focused on, and that main character is a character acting, but is kind of moving through a world that is not dissimilar to the real person, the actor's real life world. For example, the story in Chi l'ha visto, there's this guy, and he's kind of trying to find his estranged dad in Italy, and he's kind of going on this road. He lives in Germany, and he goes to Italy to try and find any trace of his dad that he's never really known, and which is actually a true component of the actor's real life. But they've made a fictional story where, different things happen, and it's not a documentary by any means. They just kind of, set up the story to happen based on those things. And the film that she wants to make is where I would be the character moving, and I would be called Ken, like I am, and I would be a musician like I am. And, but I would, be moving through. It'd also be kind of a road movie where, I'm a musician on tour and things happen. But it's not a tour documentary. It's not a documentary about my life or a biography about my life, but there'll be a lot of things from my life. And so her films are incredibly realistic. They almost sometimes feel like documentaries, or it feels like you're really watching, a real thing, because it is kind of real, but it's also fiction, but it's completely believable. And you feel, and there's something at stake, because there's, the reality of that actor's life is in the story. So it's not just make believe, shall we say?
Yeah, Ken Stringfellow in an alternative reality.
Yeah, you could say something like this.
It sounds like it's going to be great. If you go to Indiegogo, www.indiegogo.com, and probably just put in Ken the movie, you can pledge and get this dang movie made, because it's going to be great.
We've got a crowdfunding thing going on Indiegogo, and it's going well. I would say get on it immediately, although it's going for a few more weeks. Yeah. But we're getting there.
There's you can see some clips there, and it just looks like it's going to be a fantastic film.
Yes, I really believe in what we're doing, and I believe in Claudia's abilities. It's an unscripted film. There won't be like a script that we're following. She will just create situations, and we'll kind of follow there. In a way, I think it will sort of resemble this film. This film called. Have you ever heard of this film called Bass Ackwards?
No.
It's a really good movie. The guy from Seattle made it, and it's kind of like a little bit of a road movie. But I'm pretty sure that they just went places and started just improvising scenes, and I think it'll be something a lot like this.
I love it. I love it. Well, Ken, I don't want to hold you up anymore. Thank you for talking to me. I'm such a fan. I love your music. I love all the different projects. We didn't even get to talk about the -5, which is a fantastic group that you are involved in here and there. And we didn't even talk about REM, who you toured with for many, many, many years.
Yeah, there's a lot of associations that I've made over the years that we could talk about.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Come back around for another.
We'll do another shot at it at some other point. But thank you very much, Ken. And we will talk again soon.
Alrighty. Have a good one.
Have a good one, man.
Bye.
So that's our latest edition of The Deep Cut. Be sure to subscribe to the Deep Cut podcast so you don't miss out on the second part of our 2-part Posies interview with John Auer. Be sure to also visit www.indiegogo.com and enter Ken the Movie into the search box to help get this exciting film project made. Big thanks go out to Ken Stringfellow for taking time to talk to us, my super producer, Anthony Walker, for making this podcast sound so good, and all of you for supporting the Deep Cut. We leave you today with a cut from Ken's 2004 solo release, Soft Commands, on Yep Rock Records. It's called You Drew. Take care and keep searching for those deep cuts.
Take the baby's cane away and hide his little braces. Left to his devices, he still wants that rocky road. Feed him all your fables and your periodic tables. Fabulous, fatalist is what he wants to be. But you drew the poison from me, picked me off the bayonet tree, pulled me like the tooth that kept your nights from finding sleep. Move into a bungalow and disconnect the phone line. Hello, Grace, it's been a while. Your footsteps can go unnoticed. That's not to say that you weren't missed, but I guess you weren't invited. I never lacked for company, it's for care that I was wanting. But you drew the poison from